So I probably have an unhealthy obsession with being competitive. I can remember the first time that I really discovered this. It was early elementary school, and we were giving times tables. And everybody had one, and we had these races with times tables to figure out who could figure them out the quickest, and then the first one to turn them in would win. Whatever, I don't know. But it didn't matter because I wanted to be first. This went on into, I think it was 4th or 5th grade. I still remember we had this poster board on the wall. It was green, and we had spelling tests every week. And if you got the spelling test correct and got 100, you would get a little football, and they would glue this football up next to your name. I had the most footballs. It was kicking in early. Throughout high school, I remember that the school I went to, it had specific departments that we focused in on, and mine was computer programming. And once I got wind that there was awards for this and that you could win something and be recognized and have a special dinner, I'm going to win this. And sure enough, I won this. But it wasn't just academic. My career in co-ed rec softball really materialized my competitive spirit to the dismay of many of my teammates. But I will say we did win 2 trophies. It also went over into my rec volleyball career. And the more that we won, the more happy people would be. And they'd always say things like, well, it's just fun to play. And I'm like, yeah, if it's just fun to play, think how much more fun it would be if we won. And so I had to recruit people who were like-minded to me. And I can remember after one volleyball game where we lost, and we were all ticked. And one of my friends who was with me, he's walking by, and there's like this handicap sign, for parking, just to say. And he just so mad, he just punches this thing, messes up his hand. But I'm like, yeah, man, we don't like to lose here. If you got to sacrifice your hand for the good of the team, to do it. But competitiveness. Even here, I'm like, man, I got to be better than my dad and Isaac for sure. That's got to. I'm just kidding. But this competitiveness, man, I recognize it. I recognize it really inside of me. Even when I'm driving down the road, I'm like, you're not passing me, buddy. It's just innate in me for some reason. And sometimes we think, well, competitiveness is just something that we have, and it's not really a biblical thing. But I tell you, it's a pretty powerful biblical thing. In fact, one of Jesus' disciples, Peter, he's the really vigorous one. He came to Jesus kind of when Jesus was in his ministry with him after a while, and he's like, hey, listen, Jesus, I've been giving up all of this stuff for so long. Where am I going to fit in? What do I get back for this? Because in my mind, if I'm putting all of this effort in, I want this kind of reward. And even back then, Peter has this question about, where do I fit in? I want to know my ranking. Because back then, everything was hierarchical, and everything was kind of where you fit in the levels of society. And Peter had a good question. Where do I fit in this society or this kingdom that you're creating? Because Jesus was all about creating this kingdom. Well, in response to this, Jesus tells a story because that's the way he taught people. He would tell them stories, and people would understand a little bit better through the story. So what we're going to do today is kind of look at this story that kind of feeds in or off of Peter's question in chapter 19 about, where do I fit in? How do I know where I fit in the kingdom of God? So we're going to read the story, and it's called a parable. If you don't know what a parable is, it's just really a story that Jesus would tell. And parables in and of themselves are pretty objective in terms of you can read the story and know what the story is talking about, but then sometimes it gets a little murky when we kind of interpret them. So what we're going to do is just going to read the story and see what it says, and then we'll come back and kind of see how it fits into this idea of being first. So if you've got a Bible, which everybody has access to because they're in front of you if you don't have one, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 20. It's kind of this far in the Bible if you don't know where it is. That looks about 7/8 of the way. But we're going to be in Matthew chapter 20, and this is Jesus talking. And he's talking to his disciples about really what it means to be in the kingdom of God and how this hierarchy really fits in. And it really keys in to the disruptive nature, at least for me. So let's just read it and see what it says. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory as we read it. Verse number 1, for the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with laborers for a denarius, just think of a day's wage on that, he sent them into his vineyard. After going out about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, you go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give to you. So they went. Going out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he did the same. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, why do you stand idle all day? They said to him, because no one has hired us. He said to them, you go into the vineyard too. And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first. So you figure out what we're doing right now. Everybody with me? This owner of this vineyard goes out at the beginning of the day. He hires some people for a set wage. And then about midday, about maybe 9 o'clock, about 12 o'clock, about 3 o'clock, and then finally at the end of the day, he's been hiring people all day, agreeing to a wage. So verse 9, and when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius, or a full day's wage. Now when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more. Makes sense. But each of them also received a day's wage. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, these last workers worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. But he replied to one of them, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? And then verse 16, he says, so the last will be first, and the first last. Now, it's a pretty objective story. I mean, we can understand what the story says. Jesus doesn't go in and explain what happens. He just says, here's the story. Now, personally, I'm just going to be honest with you today. I have never liked this story. I have never liked this. I've never liked this parable. And I know why, and I'll explain it to you. But really where it keys in, and the reason I don't like it, is because of that last verse. Verse number 16. So the last will be first, and the first last. That doesn't connect with me. It doesn't connect with me. It makes it sound as though no matter what you're doing, God's going to somehow rearrange the order of things, and everybody who's first is going to be last, and everybody who's last is going to be first. And it doesn't set well with me. It just irks me. And part of the reason is because I never really understood the parable. I understood it from the standpoint of being objective. This is a story about God's generosity and God's grace, but I never understood the focus of it. Now, in the story, obviously the workers represent you and me. The owner represents God, and the wages are basically his grace to us. But when you get to this last phrase, it just irks me. It just irks me. And I know why. I know why. The reason is, and I'm just going to share from my perspective, the reason is because I feel like I've been one of those workers that got hired at the beginning of the day. I feel like I've been in this for so long. I feel like I've been the one in the scorching heat. I feel like I've been the one who's been burdened with the work for the entire time. I mean, growing up, I didn't know anything besides Christianity. I didn't know anything. And along with that Christianity came a lot of what you may look at as burden at the beginning of it, because I didn't really choose it per se. It was kind of chosen for me. And if you know my father, And more importantly, if you know the previous version of my father, there was no wiggle room. I mean, this is the way it was. You did this, and this is just the way it is. And so we did it just the way it is. And so my whole growing up, I feel like I was out in the field, in the vineyard, spiritually speaking, trying to do what's right. We're going to church all the time. We're doing all these things that are right. And at the time, I didn't really think anything of it. There was no issue that I really had a problem with. But I did notice, even as a kid, that we would have some people come to church every so often. And it would be like testimony time. And their testimonies kind of were so foreign to me. I mean, I was a sheltered, square kid. I mean, that's what I was, very, very sheltered. And these people would come in and they would talk about their conversion experience or their meeting God and, their lifestyles. They would talk about these things that I really had no clue. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you're coming from the pits of hell. I mean, oh my goodness, what kind of lifestyle is this? But as I kind of grew up, when I got to my teenage years and into my early 20s, it just started to irritate me. I'm just being honest. It irritated me. I got so frustrated with these testimonies because I felt like here these people were coming in and they're sharing their journey, how that, before I met God, I was a playboy and, I made a lot of money and it was all about me. And then I saw Jesus and it transformed my life. And now, I got all the money and I got all this stuff behind me. But now, everything's great. Everything's great. Now I have new purpose. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, I had to go to church every Wednesday night, Thursday, Sunday night. And you're out here making money, living this crazy life. And it felt to me, I'm not saying this is right, but it felt to me like here are these people who got their cake, got to eat it too. I mean, you did all this stuff that I had no idea. I just heard it was a lot of fun, but I never got to do it. But you got all that, and then all of a sudden you found Jesus, and life, it's just so meaningful now. But it wasn't just the stuff, it was the transformation. I'll be honest with you. I've never felt a huge transformation in my life. I've never felt the big light like Paul the Apostle. I mean, he had some bad stuff going on where he had the light and it's like, oh, there's Jesus. And it was like this huge change. I never had that. I never had the big transformative thing that I would hear these people with testimonies come and share. And they're like, my life was, we're going downhill and all this stuff. And then Jesus got a hold of me. And I'm like, I can't relate. I can't relate. I know the books of the Bible, but I can't relate to that. And so when I would come to this, it would just, this parable wouldn't set well with me because I understand the begrudging of the first guy. I'm like, I didn't get to loaf the whole day and then at the 11th hour just sign up for work and get paid the same as everybody else. And it didn't set well with me. And then you get to that last part. The last shall be first and the first shall be last. And I'm thinking, that makes no sense. Because what you're saying to me is that because I've been in this my whole life, it doesn't count for anything. It doesn't count for anything. You're going to be last. And the person who comes in and I regret my life, but boy, was it fun. They're going to be first. They're going to be first. But then it hit me. I'm looking at this parable through the lens of someone that Jesus is addressing this parable for. The first person out there working. Jesus was addressing the very perspective that I have on this parable and life in general. Because it doesn't seem fair to me. It doesn't seem right to me. And what I also realized is that when Jesus says, the first shall be last and the last shall be first, I was taking it as some kind of change in the order of who goes first and who goes last. But if you look back in the parable, he talks about the equality of all of us, the equality of who we are as people who need God's grace. So it wasn't that Jesus was shuffling up the order as much as he's saying there really is no first and there really is no last, because all of us need the full amount of grace. That transitioned my thinking about this particular passage. Because now when I'm looking at this, it's not about thinking that somehow I have bridged the gap and I deserve more. It's more about God's grace that every one of us needs, regardless of where we are in our spiritual journeys. And none of us can really bridge that gap to the degree that we think we can. And so the disruption here, the disruption is a huge disruption for me, because my status quo and my livelihood and my whole upbringing and my whole temperament says that I need to be first, that I need to be first. And yet here we have something that disrupts it and says, no, you need to be grateful that you've been chosen. And you also need to be grateful that all of us are chosen, because every one of us is in need of grace. And that's what this passage is about. It's not about who gets first, who gets last. It's about the fact that every one of us, all of us, need the full day's wage of grace. So as I'm thinking about this, I look at this and there's ramifications, obviously, how it spills out into our lives and out to our real world. And so what I've come to really take from this is that when I look at this passage, Jesus is really giving me a disruptive choice. The choice is that I can go with the status quo of what life and culture in the world says, or I can go with what Jesus says. So here's really the choice that this parable and what Jesus says is given to us. Here's the choice that we have. We can either rest in the grace that God has given, or we can live in the tension of comparativeness. This is the choice. This is a disruption. We can allow God's grace to be a characteristic of who we are, to realize it, to understand it, to live by it, to enjoy it, to rest in it. Or we can go the other route, which is what most of us kind of are accustomed to, and it's to pick up the burden or the tension of living a life of comparativeness, a life of envy, and the struggle of just not finding peace. So our disruption here, because for me, my pathway always is going to naturally take me off this direction. It's always going to take up the tension of having to be first, of having to be the one who really is in front or first or something like that. Or the disruption says we can lay that down and rest in the fact that God's grace has covered all of us. He has given all of us grace. And the grace that's given to us is something that is so powerful, but many of us don't understand just what it does for us, the power it has over us. And instead, we constantly try to get ahead for whatever reason. For me, the reason I try to get ahead is because I'm insecure. Because I have to tell myself, if I'm good at this, then that gives me security in my own self. That means I'm worth something. So the fact that I have to be first is just that I want to be first, and then I can look around, hey, I beat you in spelling tests, so I'm better than you because internally I don't feel as good as you. That's it for me. It may not be it for you. The reason I have to speed and race people on the road is because I can't let you get the better of me. I mean, as stupid as that sounds, there's this internal thing that is constantly telling me, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good, you gotta prove it, you gotta prove it, you gotta prove it. And that's the tension, that's the burden of always trying to be competitive. And the problem is you never quite get there, do you? You never quite get to the point where you feel good enough unless you're resting in the grace of God that says, yeah, you are good enough. And you can lay that down. Now, this doesn't mean that we're not faithful. It doesn't mean anything like that. But I will tell you, from my experience, it is more powerful to be driven into faithfulness by grace than it is by competitiveness and insecurity. And the grace that God gives us pushes us to the point that we're faithful out of a sense of reaction of the love for what he's done for us. So how does this disruption really play into our world? Let's get practical here, because it's one thing to talk about, it's another thing to see it in real life. So let me kind of talk philosophically first, and then I'm going to get a little bit more practical. Philosophically, one of the things I think we have to understand is looking at life through the perspective of grace. Looking at our lives and our character and who we are and our state in life through this lens of grace rather than envy. Because if we're looking at it through envy, it's going to mess with everything in our head about our relationship with God. Because here's the struggle that I would have, and here's my thinking when I'm looking through the lens of envy. If here's God's standard, all right, and I come in about here, I think, if I'm looking through this lens of comparativeness and envy, I think that in order to close this gap, that somehow by me being better than you, I can up it a little bit because you're more sinful than I am, right? So if you're more sinful than I am, then the idea is that somehow I can close this gap a little bit. That's looking through it in a comparative, envious type of approach. But the truth is, and what this is saying, is that if here's the bar, every one of us are down here. And all of the stuff that we think that we are attaining to make us better, to make us more acceptable, to make us God-like us more, all of these things, they're not moving us towards God. What they're doing is they are feeding this idea that we somehow are better than the people around us because we're so insecure that we don't actually understand the only way that this gap is closed is because of the grace of God in the first place. And philosophically, if we're going through life not understanding that God's grace is powerful enough to close the gap, to build a right relationship with him, regardless of where I am, regardless of where you are, regardless of where any human is. If we understand that grace and look at life through the perspective of grace rather than envy, thinking that, oh, this person's getting the better of me, or I need to be better than this person, or this. And Jesus comes and says, no, the first shall be last and the last shall be first, because all of you need the full amount of grace in your life. And philosophically, if you look through life through that perspective, it begins to formulate a viewpoint of your world. And I think in these disruptive type of sayings that Jesus has, we often think that they're just so hard and they're not realistic. But friends, this is the reality of life. This is really what it means to be a follower of Christ, not just for the sake of doing something you don't want to do, but to realize that God has your best interests in mind, and God wants you to be able to go through life resting in his grace. He doesn't want you to be overwhelmed and stressed out by the fact that everyone else seems to be getting ahead of you. And what does that mean for you? Am I worth anything? His grace. So let's kind of break this down practically then. Let me give you three areas where we can kind of hit this. The first is in our spiritual journeys, in our church life. Believe it or not, competitiveness happens inside the church. Not in this church, of course, but it happens. It happens. There's somehow this sense of church, and I think we've brought it in as humans, to where there's this hierarchy about who's more important to God than anybody else. And we look at the people who are more important as though, well, they got in on the ground floor. They were early investors. They've been out there and they've been toiling in the sun. So they're more spiritual. They've closed the gap a little bit more than I have, right? And so we have this kind of idea that somehow some people are more spiritual, or they're more godly, or they're more better than we are because of their longevity, of what they profess, of how they serve, of what they do. And I've seen it in churches. I have seen it where people have been in the church for years, see new people come in and they're like, well, let's see if you fit in here. This is not our church. This is God's church. This is his vineyard. And as the master of the vineyard, everybody who comes in gets a full dose of grace. And who are we to be the gatekeepers of God's grace anyway? Who are we to be the ones that are standing in the way of someone experiencing the fullness of his grace? It doesn't matter when we are called. It just matters that we are called. And grace, going at it through the lens of grace, allows us to welcome people in, to lift people up, to celebrate when God does something in their lives. The route of envy and the tension and the burden of competitiveness, we look around and we're like, I hope God doesn't answer that prayer. Just the tension, and I don't even think sometimes it's a necessity of negativity. It's just our own insecurities, because we're choosing to go down this road of envy and competitiveness. The body of Christ is designed as a celebratory way, that when you experience something great in your life, this church should come around you and celebrate with you. And when you are hurting, we should be coming around you and hurting with you. But so often, if we're looking at it this way, if we have the competitive, envious nature, when somebody is celebrating, we're hurting. When somebody is hurting, we're celebrating. Now, the reason this is so important is because if we don't get this right, if we don't understand looking through life through grace, and if we don't understand our spiritual journey and that we all need grace, the other two areas I'm going to share with you really don't matter. They really don't matter, because they grow out of this relationship with God. So the next one is in our workplace. Now, I realize some of you are retired, so you can take your nap for a couple minutes. But the rest of us who are still out there fighting in this crazy world, fighting for positions, fighting for just an affirmation sometimes, fighting to be recognized, fighting just to feel as though we're important in our places of work. If we have the approach of grace versus envy, and it's in us spiritually, then it needs to come out in our workplace. Now, I'll be the first to admit, workplaces don't really follow the Bible in terms of how they treat people. It's a little bit of a different dynamic. It's cutthroat. It's what have you done for me lately? It's all of these things. But yet, in spite of all that, we are called to be a light in a dark world. We are called to be separate. And I understand what it's like. I mean, I understand. We get in work situations where it seems like somebody's not doing their job, but they're getting paid the same amount of money. They're always sick. They're never here. All of these things that kind of overwhelm us. Now, I'm not saying that we don't deal with things in the correct manner. But what I am saying is that as children of God, we don't become that person. And you know what that person is. The person who always is the one to begin complaining, to begin arguing, to begin gossiping, to begin sending the workplace into a toxic environment. We're better than that. And as hard as it is, we are called to be a light even in environments like that. I don't know your work environment, but I do know what God has called us to be. And he has called us to live in grace and to realize that the more that we think things are owed to us, much like that first worker, the more we begin to move into what is owed to us, into an arrogant kind of lifestyle of entitlement. Now, again, I'm not saying you should be a doormat at work, but there are ways to deal with it. But until we have the grace to understand the grace of God, that he has given us the ability to earn a wage. He has given us the ability to have a livelihood. And yet sometimes, even in spite of everything, we can't see that. We can't see it because we're so overwhelmed by what is not right. And I've been working in a lot of places, churches also. And I'm going to tell you, there are no perfect places to work. And the junk is everywhere, everywhere. Unless you're self-employed, then you got other junk to deal with. But it's there. And God has called us to live in this state of grace. Grace. What kind of a testimony would it be if we entered not as pushovers, not as rollovers, but as people who are grace-filled, filled with grace? This leads us to the third point. And this is the third area. And this is with our friends and family. Friends and family. Grace or envy? Grace or envy? Grace says that we should forgive, that we should allow God's grace to be extended to someone else. Envy says, I know what they did, I know who they are, I don't like them, so they shouldn't get anything. I've come to the realization in my life, when I come to this place, is I've had a lot of bad stuff happen to me, and I've done a lot of bad stuff to people. I have been required to give grace, and I've also been at people's mercy to receive grace. When we begin to look around at our relationships with family or friends or anybody else or whatever, this I know is a tough one because there's so much emotional stuff that goes along with it. My fallback on this for me is that I am a person who is in constant need of grace. And how can I, as a person who claims to receive God's infinite grace, how can I withhold it from somebody else? That may not work for you, but I do want to ask you, What's the level of grace that you've received from God that he is asking you to give to someone else? Kind of goes back to what we talked about last week, but in this framework, you have the choice to live in the freedom of grace. Yes, the freedom of grace. Or the tension and the burden of envy, of comparativeness, of anger, of all of these things. And just again, to throw a little bit more gasoline on this fire, God had that choice with you as well. And he chose the freedom of grace for us. And this whole parable, it's not about who's getting more than who's getting less. This is about all of us getting God's grace, and how understanding God's grace has the transformative power to allow you to go out into this world, into your places of work tomorrow, into your family dinners tonight, and be a person of freedom because you've experienced and you're now living out this kind of grace. That's what God is giving you. That's why he's trying to disrupt this burden, this tension, this going through life of always feeling like you got to be first, always feeling like you've got to be the one in ahead of everything, because if you don't, what's that going to mean about me? Well, I'm going to tell you what it means. If you're a follower of Christ and you've accepted the grace, you are a chosen son and daughter of God. You are a person who cannot find anything that is going to give you more value than the death of Jesus Christ, who willingly gave his son for you. And this is the grace that you've received. You are okay. You are more than okay. You've inherited from the King in God's kingdom. He has given you the full wage, whether you came at the beginning, middle, or end. His grace is sufficient for all of it. And this is not about us earning. This is all about God's generosity. And no, it may not appear fair, but I'll tell you, it's more generous than we could ever imagine, no matter where we come from. I want to end by just saying this. At the beginning of this message, I said how, I feel like I was one of the first ones that got tired, and I'm out there working all day, and all these people out there living their lives and whatever. You know what I've come to realize? I'm pretty much an 11th hour guy. I think a lot more of myself than is probably a reality. And the more I come to that realization, the more I realize, this is God's business. He's right. He's the owner. He can deliver grace however he wants to deliver it. I'm just thankful he gave it to me. And I hope you're thankful he gave it to you as well. Let's stand. Let's close in prayer today. God, thank you for today and for the men and women who have come. And I just ask, as always, that we will just be able to sift through everything and find the word that really speaks to us. I know that this is challenging for me personally, but I also know the other side, that when I am able to find those moments in your grace, it really, really, really changes life radically. And I'm thankful for this disruption. I'm thankful for the disruption that says, stop being so obsessed with something that's already been given to you. Thank you for your grace. May we live in it this week, in your son's name. Amen. All right, everybody, have a great week. See you Wednesday night.
you.